The Gulf of Mexico stretched wide and restless, its waves lapping against the hulls of wooden Spanish ships. The air was thick with salt and anticipation, the horizon a line of possibility and doom. These vessels, massive yet delicate against the sea, carried more than men. They bore the weight of an empire's ambition. On board stood Hernán Cortés, his eyes sharp with greed and determination, his heart a storm of visions, gold, glory, conquest. The world beyond the horizon promised riches and legends, and Cortés intended to claim both. Before him lay a civilization unparalleled in its grandeur, a kingdom of gods and stone, of ritual and wealth, whose power stretched across the Valley of Mexico, the Aztec Empire. Its capital, Tenochtitlan, rose from the center of a vast lake like a city of dreams, a marvel of human ingenuity. Bridges and causeways connected the city to the shores. Canals wove like veins through bustling marketplaces, and every street pulsed with life and purpose. Marble temples towered over plazas filled with the scent of maize, incense, and blood. Human sacrifices fed the gods, ensuring that the sun would rise, the rains would fall, and the empire would endure. Emperor Moctezuma II, cloaked in feathers and jade, ruled as both king and divine intermediary. To question him was to question the cosmos. Citizens and warriors alike revered him. Priests whispered his will in temples, and even the smallest farmer knew the rhythm of life was bound by his decree. Yet even the mightiest city is vulnerable when the world itself begins to shift. When the Spanish first arrived, Tenochtitlan's residents were curious, cautious, and awed. Cortés, aware of their fear and fascination, disembarked with a retinue of armed men, steel glinting, horses stamping on the earth. The Aztecs had never seen such creatures that towered over men, their hooves hammering like thunder. Muskets and cannons roared, strange sounds that made even seasoned warriors pause. And behind these instruments of war came diplomacy and deception, alliances with Aztec enemies who had long suffered under tribute and oppression. At first, Moctezuma welcomed these strangers with gifts of gold and exotic offerings. Gold, once a symbol of the empire's power, became a beacon that blinded the Aztecs to the peril within their gates. Cortés moved with patient cunning, observing the city, mapping its streets, weaving a network of allies among the discontented, and planting the seeds of distrust that would grow into chaos. As days passed, suspicion festered. Minor incidents once overlooked became sparks in a tinderbox. Aztec nobles argued over the foreigners' intentions. Warriors questioned whether to attack or negotiate, and everywhere, the tension tightened like a noose. Cortés' men, patient and calculating, waited for the right moment, striking where weakness could be exploited, manipulating fear as skillfully as they wielded swords. The turning point came when Cortés captured Moctezuma. The emperor, once the divine ruler of a mighty empire, became a pawn in the Spaniards' game. The city's heart quivered. Bridges that had carried daily life now became choke points of suspicion. Temples once echoing with chants of devotion now witnessed whispered plots, and the pulse of Tenochtitlan, so steady for centuries, began to falter. Night fell, but the city's streets did not sleep. The Aztecs whispered among themselves, plotting, questioning, fearing what they did not yet understand. The Spaniards moved like shadows, striking when least expected, sowing confusion and terror. Every ambush, every sudden attack, taught the citizens a brutal lesson. The world had changed, and with it, their safety, their power, their gods themselves. But the Spaniards were not the only threat. Hidden within the empire were those who resented Moctezuma's rule, conquered peoples waiting for an opportunity to turn the tide. Cortés recognized this and exploited it, building an army not of his own men alone, but of thousands of indigenous allies. The Aztecs' enemies became the architects of their own downfall. Alliances formed in whispers, promises were traded under moonlight, and the stage was set for a conflict that would consume the city. Smoke rose from distant villages, Rumors traveled faster than soldiers, and the empire's intricate web of control began to fray. Couriers brought news of skirmishes, and the Aztec warriors' confidence wavered. For the first time in generations, the gods' favor seemed uncertain. What had always been the center of the world, the jewel of Mesoamerica, was now a city under siege, not just by foreign steel, but by deception, disease, and internal fracture. Yet Tenochtitlan's people were not cowed. Citizens, priests, warriors, and even slaves took to the canals and streets, preparing for a battle that would decide their fate. Courage surged alongside fear. They fortified temples, sharpened obsidian blades, and prayed with voices raised to the heavens. Each citizen knew the stakes: the empire's survival, their families' lives, and their god's honor rested on their shoulders. As night deepened, the first sounds of war echoed across the city. Horses' hooves struck the causeways like drums of doom. Steel clashed with obsidian in the plazas. Fires leapt from thatched rooftops, smoke billowing into the starless sky. Tenochtitlan was no longer a city of peace. It had become a battlefield, the stage for a collision between worlds, between gods and men, between ambition and destiny. The first part of this tale ends here, on the brink of destruction. The streets burn, the empire trembles, and above it all, Cortés watches, patient, calculating, knowing that soon the heart of Tenochtitlan will either break or burn. The sun rose over Tenochtitlan, but the light brought no comfort. Smoke still curled from distant rooftops, and the acrid scent of fear and fire hung in the air. The city that had once glittered like a jewel now bristled with tension. Every canal, causeway, and plaza alive with the sound of preparation and whispered terror. Cortés' forces, bolstered by thousands of indigenous allies, moved with precision. Each strike, each ambush, each deception carved away at the empire's foundation. The first clashes of open battle had begun. Spaniards on horseback thundered through the streets, their riders wielding steel that the Aztec warriors had never faced. Obsidian blades, razor-sharp but fragile against armor, struck with deadly precision, yet could not match the force of the mounted soldiers. Every street became a theater of chaos, where the cries of the wounded mixed with the roar of cannon and the clatter of horses. Moctezuma, once the unshakable center of divine authority, now felt the weight of mortality pressing down on him. He moved through the city, his golden robes a faint echo of the majesty he once embodied, trying to maintain order, to calm fear, to inspire courage. Yet his presence could not quell the panic. Citizens whispered that the gods were displeased, that the strange visitors were omens of doom. Even the bravest warriors hesitated, uncertain whether the sun would rise again to favor their cause. Meanwhile, disease began its invisible march. Smallpox, unknown to the Aztecs, spread silently among the crowded streets and canals. Children fell first, their cries piercing the city's walls. Then adults succumbed, leaving the strong and the brave to face the Spaniards' advance while the weak perished at home. Fear of illness combined with fear of steel, and the empire's heart began to falter. No ritual, no offering, no sacrifice could stop this invisible enemy. Yet Moctezuma and his priests continued to perform ceremonies, their chants rising against the chaos, a desperate plea to the heavens for salvation. The siege intensified. Spaniards and their allies cut off supplies along the causeways, setting fire to granaries and markets. Hunger gnawed at the edges of the population, and even those untouched by disease began to weaken. Moctezuma attempted diplomacy, sending emissaries to Cortés with gold and gifts, hoping to placate the invaders to buy time. But Cortés, patient and relentless, used these gifts not to negotiate peace, but to consolidate leverage, to sow dissent among the city's factions, and to ensure that no path to victory remained untouched by Spanish cunning. Battles erupted at every turn. Plaza after plaza became soaked with blood. Aztec warriors fought with valor and desperation, their chants echoing across the water and stone. But each engagement carried a mounting toll, Obsidian weapons splintered against steel, archers' arrows fell short against armored cavalry, and walls that had once seemed impenetrable were now vulnerable to siege tactics and sabotage. Each failed defense chipped away at the city's resolve, each death a reminder that no empire, however mighty, could resist a combination of force, strategy, and fate. Amidst the chaos, Moctezuma's authority waned. Trusted nobles began to question him openly. Some whispered that the emperor had lost the favor of the gods. Others believed his decisions endangered the city. Even the people, once devoted and loyal, looked upon him with doubt. Moctezuma's indecision, born of centuries of tradition and divine responsibility, became a vulnerability that Cortés exploited at every opportunity. By the middle of the siege, fires burned not just at the edges of the city but within its very core. Temples once sacred became battlefronts. Cannons, brought by the Spaniards, shattered walls of stone that had withstood countless storms and invasions. Aztec warriors, bound by honor and desperation, made valiant stands atop pyramids, only to be forced down by relentless assaults. Streets that had carried festivals and traders were now rivers of blood and ash. Yet even in despair, Tenochtitlan fought with a resilience that astonished its enemies. Warriors used the canals to maneuver, ambushing the Spanish from unexpected angles. Civilians aided in defense, setting traps, barricading entrances, and ensuring that every step forward by the invaders was contested. The city became a labyrinth of resistance, each corner a potential ambush, each rooftop a vantage point of defiance. But the invisible enemy, smallpox, continued to claim lives. Entire neighborhoods emptied overnight. The once bustling marketplaces now held only the sick and dying. Fear of disease compounded fear of attack. Mothers clutched children, priests recited prayers for salvation, and Moctezuma walked the streets, powerless to stop either the Spaniards or the pestilence. And then came betrayal from within. Some conquered tribes, long resentful of Aztec domination, aided the Spaniards openly. They provided intelligence, guides, and reinforcements, tipping the balance further toward Cortés's favor. The Aztecs were now fighting not only an external threat, but the fractures within their own empire. What had been the mightiest power in Mesoamerica now faced a war on multiple fronts. Steel, fire, disease, and treachery. As Part 2 closes, Tenochtitlan stands resilient but weakened, a city whose very heart is under siege. Fires blaze along canals, cries of warriors and civilians mingle with the roar of Spanish muskets, and the emperor's authority is a shadow of what it once was. The Aztec Empire's future hangs by a thread, and the stage is set for the inevitable confrontation that will decide not only the fate of a city, but the legacy of a civilization. Tenochtitlan in late 1520 was a city on the edge of annihilation. Smoke choked the air, mingling with the metallic scent of blood. The once vibrant plazas were now battlegrounds, streets littered with shattered obsidian, splintered wood, and the fallen bodies of warriors and civilians alike. The city's canals, once arteries of trade and life, carried debris and the sickly remains of the infected. Fear was no longer hidden, it was a living, breathing presence in every home, every temple, every marketplace. Moctezuma too moved through the city like the ghost of a king, his golden regalia dulled by ash and soot. Once his word had been law, his presence a symbol of divine favor. Now it was a fragile thread, stretched taut by the horrors unfolding around him. Nobles whispered in secret councils, questioning his leadership. Warriors argued over strategy, some demanding confrontation, others urging caution. The emperor, torn between duty and despair, realized that the Aztec world he had inherited was unraveling faster than he could mend. Cortés, meanwhile, continued his relentless siege. Night raids struck the outer districts, fires consumed food stores, and allies from subjugated tribes turned against the city at critical moments. Each incursion further weakened the Aztec defense, spreading confusion and panic. Cortés's strategic genius lay not just in brute force, but in psychological warfare. He understood that fear could be as devastating as any sword. The clash of steel and stone echoed constantly. Aztec warriors fought with the courage of men defending gods, families, and centuries of tradition. From the rooftops and temples, they rained arrows and stones upon the Spanish and their allies. Bridges became choke points where desperate battles turned into slaughter. Obsidian blades splintered against armor, yet each warrior struck with precision, knowing that their lives and their city's survival depended on every movement. But disease was the silent enemy, spreading faster than Cortez's forces could move. Smallpox cut swaths through the population, claiming children, elders, and warriors alike. Families mourned in hushed terror, unable to bury the dead quickly enough, and the psychological toll of watching neighbors, siblings, and parents succumb was immense. Morale wavered. Even the bravest fighters began to see the inevitability of the empire's decline. In the midst of chaos, a tragic confrontation sealed the fate of the emperor. Moctezuma, hoping to mediate between the city and the Spaniards, was seized and held captive. The people, seeing their god-king under foreign control, felt both outrage and despair. Some Aztec warriors attempted to rescue him, clashing with Cortez men in the plazas. But the Spanish held firm, and in a tragic twist, Moctezuma died. Accounts vary, some saying he was killed by the Spanish, others that he was struck by stones from his own people. Regardless of the cause, the emperor's death shattered the spiritual and political backbone of Tenochtitlan. Without Moctezuma, organized resistance began to crumble. Commanders argued over succession and strategy, their voices drowned by the chaos of bombardments and street fighting. The Spanish and their allies pressed every advantage, seizing control of key districts, burning and pillaging to prevent regrouping. Each captured temple, each fallen plaza, was a psychological blow as much as a tactical victory. Even as desperation mounted, the people of Tenochtitlan refused to surrender quietly. Women and children assisted in fortifications, warriors hid in canals and rooftops to stage ambushes, and priests performed sacred rites to invoke protection from their gods. Every corner of the city became a defensive stronghold. Yet the siege, combined with starvation, disease, and relentless assault, gradually strangled the city's ability to resist. Outside the walls, Cortez's network of indigenous allies exploited every weakness. They cut off food supplies, guided attacks through less defended canals, and spread rumors of Aztec weakness to amplify fear and chaos. What had been an empire capable of marshaling thousands in coordinated strikes was now reduced to pockets of stubborn resistance, each isolated and overwhelmed in turn. By early 1521, Tenochtitlan's outer districts had fallen. Smoke rose in dense clouds, and the smell of burning wood and human flesh permeated every street. The city's canals, once a symbol of ingenuity and life, now reflected fire and destruction. Every day the Spanish tightened their grip. Every night the surviving Aztecs regrouped in ever smaller enclaves, fighting tooth and nail for survival, for honor, and for the memory of their fallen emperor. As Part 3 closes, Tenochtitlan stands wounded but unbowed. Its walls, though breached, continue to resist. Its people, though starving and diseased, continue to fight, yet the inevitability of collapse looms. The Aztec Empire, magnificent and unyielding for centuries, now faces the inexorable march of conquest, disease, and betrayal. The final chapter of resistance is approaching, a culmination of courage, blood, and fire that will decide the fate of an entire civilization. The air above Tenochtitlan had grown thick with smoke and despair. The once pristine canals reflected firelight instead of sunlight. The city's golden temples, symbols of divine power, now glimmered with ash and molten stone. Hunger gnawed at every stomach, disease claimed its victims silently, and the ever-present terror of Spanish steel haunted every street. The empire that had withstood centuries now teetered on the brink of annihilation. Cortez, with his men and indigenous allies, orchestrated the final siege with meticulous precision. Artillery roared from the causeways, battering walls that had once seemed unshakable. Streets became funnels of death. Bridges and canals, once lifelines, now served as traps where Aztec defenders were forced into brutal skirmishes. Every hour, every strike eroded the city's defenses. The Aztec warriors, despite exhaustion and dwindling numbers, fought with unparalleled valor. Obsidian blades flashed in the firelight, and arrows rained upon the invaders from rooftops and temple steps. Women carried water to the wounded, organized food distribution in hidden cellars, and even children aided in reinforcing barricades. Priests invoked the gods in desperate chants, hoping to summon divine intervention, yet the flames seemed to swallow their prayers. Moctezuma's death had left a vacuum of authority. Nobles and commanders tried to coordinate resistance, but coordination became increasingly impossible. Communication between districts broke down under constant bombardment. Each surviving enclave became isolated, fighting individually against a superior force. The psychological toll was immense. Courage battled despair in every mind, yet the city refused to surrender outright. The Spanish tightened their encirclement. Causeways were blocked, food and water supplies cut off. Fires, intentionally set by Cortez's forces, spread uncontrollably through wooden structures, turning neighborhoods into furnaces. Every attempt at a counterattack by the Aztecs was met with superior weaponry and strategic cunning. Muskets and cannons decimated massed warriors. Cavalry struck with speed and terror. The Aztecs were masters of the battlefield in open plains. But Tenochtitlan, their own city, became a trap as the Spanish adapted to the canals and streets. As days turned into weeks, starvation and disease compounded the devastation. Citizens scavenged for scraps, eating roots and whatever they could find. Smallpox continued to claim lives indiscriminately, leaving the strongest survivors facing a demoralized and fragmented society. Mothers wept for their children. Priests cried out to gods who seemed deaf, and warriors fought with the grim realization that even victory in battle could not undo the slow, creeping death around them. The Spanish moved systematically through the city. Pyramids and temples, once the pinnacle of Aztec culture, were desecrated, looted, and partially destroyed. The great temple of Tenochtitlan, which had dominated the skyline for centuries, became the stage for one of the final bloody confrontations. Aztec warriors made their last stand atop the sacred steps, shouting chants of defiance, fighting to their deaths. But steel and gunpowder were unstoppable. Cannon fire tore through stone and timber. Cavalry charged through barricades. Muskets cut down defenders with precision. As the city's core fell, the remaining populace faced impossible choices. Some tried to flee across the shattered causeways, only to be intercepted by Spanish cavalry or drowning in the canals. Others surrendered, exhausted and starving, knowing that resistance meant certain death. Tenochtitlan, once a jewel of Mesoamerica, now lay in ruins, a city of fire, ash, and silence, its streets littered with the fallen and the dying. By late August, the siege reached its conclusion. The Aztec army had been effectively destroyed, its warriors dead, captured, or dispersed. Key leaders had perished, either in combat or from disease, and organized resistance was no longer possible. Cortez's forces, though smaller in number than the city's original population, held absolute control over the remaining territory. The surrender of Tenochtitlan marked the collapse of Aztec political authority. What remained of the city's population was forced to submit, their homes and temples plundered, their culture subdued under the weight of conquest. Spanish colonial rule would soon be established, and the lake that had cradled the empire's capital would bear witness to a new world, born from blood, fire, and subjugation. Yet even in this devastation, the spirit of the Aztec people endured. Though their empire had fallen, their traditions, their knowledge, and their memories survived in whispers, in the hearts of survivors, and in the stories passed down through generations. Cortez may have taken the city, But he could not erase the essence of a civilization that had flourished for centuries. As Part 4 closes, Tenochtitlan is a city transformed from the beating heart of an empire to a battlefield of conquest. The fall is nearly complete, but the consequences of this destruction and the stories of courage, defiance, and survival are only beginning to ripple across history. The stage is set for the final reckoning, a conclusion that will seal the fate of one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. The smoke of Tenochtitlan's burning temples lingered for weeks over the lake. What had been a thriving metropolis, a crown jewel of Mesoamerica, now lay in ruins. Streets once alive with merchants, priests, warriors, and citizens were silent. The canals that carried canoes filled with trade and laughter now bore debris, ash, and the dead. The city that had stood for centuries had fallen, and with it, the heart of an empire. Hernán Cortés and his allies walked through the remnants of the capital, their steps echoing against shattered stone and charred timber. To them, the conquest was complete. The Aztec Emperor dead, the warriors defeated, the city under Spanish control. Yet even in victory, Cortés understood the magnitude of what had been destroyed. Gold and treasure could be claimed, temples looted, pyramids dismantled. But the spirit, the culture, the knowledge of an empire was not so easily possessed. The surviving Aztecs faced an uncertain future. Families were displaced, communities shattered, and survivors forced to serve the new colonial rulers. Spanish authority imposed its language, religion, and governance on a people who had once known autonomy, ritual, and divine kingship. Temples became churches, marketplaces transformed into colonial plazas, and the symbols of Aztec faith were systematically replaced. The human cost was staggering, tens of thousands dead from battle, disease, starvation, and oppression, with countless more struggling under the weight of colonization. Yet the story of Tenochtitlan was not entirely one of erasure. The knowledge, traditions, and memory of the Aztec people persisted. Survivors carried oral histories, songs, and rituals into hidden corners of villages, preserving fragments of culture that would endure for generations. Art, language, and ceremony survived in subtle, resilient ways, resisting the totality of conquest. Even as the Spanish established dominance, the Aztec legacy remained alive in memory that would inform identity, resistance, and pride in centuries to come. The fall of the empire was more than a military defeat. It was a transformation of an entire world. The conquest opened Mesoamerica to European colonization, altering trade, governance, religion, and social structures irrevocably. Gold and silver were extracted, crops and labor restructured, and new societies built atop the ruins of an ancient civilization. The Aztecs, once masters of a great empire, became subjects in a foreign hierarchy, their achievements overshadowed but not forgotten. Cortés, for all his ambition and brutality, became a symbol of conquest. The narrative written in European accounts celebrated the fall of Tenochtitlan as the triumph of civilization over savagery. But history remembers the deeper truth. This was a collision of worlds, a human tragedy and a testament to resilience. The Aztec Empire's destruction was not merely a story of swords and fire. It was the story of an entire society forced to adapt, survive, and endure. Even centuries later, the spirit of the Aztec people echoes in Mexico. Archaeological ruins, codices, and traditions carry the memory of a civilization that faced annihilation, yet refused to vanish entirely. The lessons of Tenochtitlan's fall resonate. The power of resilience, the inevitability of change, and the enduring strength of culture, even in the face of overwhelming force. The fall of the Aztec Empire was not just a chapter of conquest. It was the transformation of history itself. It was a story of courage and defiance, of human ambition and divine belief, of tragedy and endurance. The pyramids, now silent and scarred, speak of a people who reached for the heavens, whose civilization once commanded awe and respect, and whose legacy continues to shape the world. In the end, the empire may have fallen, its leaders slain, its temples destroyed, but the spirit of the Aztec people survived, woven into the land. The culture and the memory of a world forever changed. Tenochtitlan had fallen, yet its story would echo through centuries, a testament to the triumph of human spirit over even the most relentless forces of destruction. The Aztec Empire's rise and fall remain a monument not of defeat alone, but of human resilience, innovation, and the enduring pursuit of meaning against impossible odds. The city that burned in fire and blood became a symbol, not of the end, but of transformation. A civilization remembered, mourned, and honored, forever etched in history.